Hey, Jenin, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Good. It's good to finally meet you. I've been following you on Twitter for quite some time. You have awesome and spicy takes about lockdowns that I'm so mystified why more people across the political spectrum aren't just like apoplectic about what we've done for the last 2 years, but you have been apoplectic, so congrats on that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have for the entire 2 years. And it is quite shocking, especially that the left and liberal side of the spectrum has been so accepting of all of these measures that fail again and again, but nevertheless, they keep insisting upon them.
Yeah, and I want to dig into that because you're either a lefty or a former lefty, and let's give people some context for who you are. Talk about your organization and a little bit about your political journey to this point.
Yeah, sure. So I was a public defender in New York for almost a decade. And, that's a very sort of left career, and the people I was around were mostly from the left. I definitely considered myself a leftist, although I always had sort of different views. I didn't just adopt wholesale any specific, ideology or something. And I always had sort of differed from my comrades on like free speech, stuff like that. But nevertheless, I would say for the most part considered myself a leftist. But when COVID hit, I really departed from everybody. I thought, first of all, this was just a horrendous civil liberties violation to tell people they can't leave their homes for weeks, months on end. You can't send your kids to school. You can't run your business. You can't see your loved ones. And I couldn't understand why the people around me didn't see it that way. And I also realized that it was going to harm mostly the poor and working class. The people, the Zoom class could keep their paychecks, but it's really the poor people who rely upon, going to work in customer service who were going to be harmed the most by these. And it was stunning to me that that wasn't discussed more from the beginning. So I became sort of active in fighting lockdowns, mostly writing. I started to write for an organization called the American Institute for Economic Research, which hosted the Great Barrington Declaration a lot of people might have heard about, which...
Yeah, we've had Phil...
Oh, yeah.
Phil Magnus and Jeffrey Tucker and another guy who's going to be pissed that I forget his name.
Matt.
It wasn't Matt, anyway.
Not Pete Earle.
It was Pete Earle,
yeah.
Yeah, we had a really scintillating conversation about supply chain.
Oh, yeah.
It was very exciting.
He's a really good economist.
But anyway, yeah, those are we're big fans of AIER and the Great Barrington Declaration.
Yeah.
So that was that like a defining moment? Like, when did you decide that lockdowns were a bad idea? Were you day one or?
Pretty much from the beginning. It was sort of my instinctual reaction. And then sort of the people in the media around me, were very much on the other side. And so I doubted myself a few times. And I was a pretty avid New York Times reader, even though I always had some issues with the New York Times. But they published an article by someone named David Katz pretty early on saying like the costs of lockdowns might be more than the benefits. And I thought he made a lot of really good points. They very shortly after that sort of stopped running anything that doubted this narrative. But one thing that really tipped me off was their coverage of Sweden, because starting in like April of 2020, they were saying, Sweden was a catastrophe, the failure of Sweden. And I'm like, you're very eager very early on to declare this a failure when this is clearly like a long view. I mean, it was clear COVID wasn't going to be over in a month or something by then. So that suggested to me that there was, sort of a politicization going on and a desire to prove this narrative right. And the more time went on, the more I saw that this was really just the wrong way. It was obvious these measures weren't working. The idea that you can just put people apart like rats in cages and stop a disease is absurd. I mean, people exist, and all you're doing is keeping them in their homes with each other, and it's spreading in sort of maybe different ways than it would. But
yeah. So what? When did you get associated with the new Civil Liberties Alliance?
So I began working there in April. I continued working as a public defender. The more public I was, the more I was writing, and I started a Twitter account that was very anti-lockdown. The more I started getting colleagues at my old job were stumbling across my work, were very upset, and I knew that it wasn't going to be a very good environment for me when I went back to the office. And I was also this was taking up a lot of my time, the anti-lockdown stuff, and I was trying to do my day job. So someone actually told me about the new Civil Liberties Alliance, which had been bringing some lawsuits against business closures or on behalf of business.
Did you actually feel like shunned or like that you might not be able to keep that job?
My boss made it clear that he wasn't going to fire me. But so I wasn't really worried about getting fired, but I knew that I was sort of loathed. I still am among those people for sure.
Which this is still like, this is bizarre to me that this thing has become so fundamentally tribal. I don't understand, but we'll get into that some more. So you joined this new thing.
Yeah, their sort of core mission is to fight the administrative state. The idea is that administrative agencies have way too much power. These are unelected officials, and they often go, use statutes that Congress enacted in order to implement sort of have a lot of control over Americans' lives. And we're seeing that actually with the vaccine
OSHA
mandates,
might be proving that
exactly,
point. Yeah.
exactly. So the mission of Ncla, the new Civil Liberties Alliance, is sort of to start to chip away at some of this power and give it back to the people and their elected officials. So I joined them in April, and I've been doing mostly vaccine mandate cases since then.
So I think you were involved in the George Mason case. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I was
Okay.
actually the lead attorney.
And that's Todd Zawicki was the plaintiff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit, because I haven't talked about it yet on the show.
Oh, yeah. So Professor Zawicki had natural immunity to COVID. He actually had a very bad bout of COVID early on and had really high antibody levels. He did not want to get the vaccine, but George Mason University, where he was a tenured law professor, implemented a vaccine mandate in the fall. And so we filed a lawsuit on his behalf. It ended up sort of settling out of court. He had another medical condition that GMU decided to grant him an exemption on that basis, I think because they didn't want to deal with the lawsuit.
They just backed down. But he's tweeting in the last couple of days that they're coming back with the full mandate again, right?
Yeah, they're coming back with a booster mandate, and we've had I've heard from a couple of people, so stay tuned. We might GMU might be hearing more from us.
I hope so. I mean, this is everything, because I think the implications of the government bullying these institutions into doing this, or these institutions deciding for themselves that they want to do this, it seems like a blank check to dictate all sorts of behavior, positive or negative.
Right. And the implications of these booster mandates, I mean, I'm very opposed to the vaccine mandates in the first place, but this sort of takes it to a different level, where now it's just an ongoing intrusion into your life. I mean, is it every 6 months? I think even San Francisco is now saying you have to have in order to comply with their proof of vaccination to go into places of public accommodation, you have to show that you're up to date.
Yeah.
I think they're calling it up to date. So now it's just, and with that, and frankly, this is a vaccine that's now outdated, really doesn't seem to work very well against the Omicron variant. And we haven't had long-term studies on the effects of getting a booster every few months. So.
Yeah. It's definitely going to affect my life personally, because I eventually got vaccinated last year, because my wife and I do lots of international travel, and we were told that if we got vaccinated, we would be free to go about our business. Well, that wasn't true, but then I got COVID, presumably Delta, a significant. I mean, I didn't feel like I was going to die or anything, but it lasted a couple weeks and it was pretty rough. So I am not in the market ever for a booster, and my Libertarian side just sort of doesn't want to do it because they're doing that. But it's gonna affect people, particularly people with natural immunity, who are like, it might actually not be a smart health decision to get boosted. Yeah.
And now there's data coming out, especially for men under 30 or 40, about the myocarditis risks, which, the government agencies like the CDC have been downplaying in a pretty shocking way. I mean, I think they were initially saying it was like 1 in millions. Now it's looking like it's 1 in 2,000 men that age get myocarditis, I think just after vaccination the first time, not even necessarily the booster.
Yeah.
And there's been a pretty significant attempt to downplay the implications. I talked to this cardiologist a lot named Anish Koka. He's a very, very esteemed cardiologist, and he was saying, they keep saying, oh, myocarditis just resolves. You get crushing chest pain. You go to the hospital with crushing chest pain. You have enzymes leaking from your heart. Scar tissue forms, which could cause heart attacks earlier down the road. So all these young men could be dropping dead of heart attacks at 40 instead of 60, or, and so to be dismissing this and to leave personal choice out of the equation is just shocking to me.
And there is this, it's as much as the social media censors want to stop it, like it's hard to miss the fact that soccer players are dropping on the field.
Yes, yeah.
They can't really downplay that because it's happening and it's just radically unusual.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And like the one thing that I think, well, there's so many implications of this that are game changing, but the one thing that I was frustrated with when I was trying to figure out whether or not I would get vaccinated. I did it basically because my wife was going to do it, and I didn't want her to turn into a zombie and me have to like put her down. That would be an awful way to end our marriage. So I figured we could shuffle off into zombie heaven together. But when I tried to research my own particular health situation, all I found was propaganda.
Yeah,
even in the health science journals, and one thing that's so shocking to me is how the CDC in particular, but all of these public health organizations, it's all propaganda. Why do you think that is?
Oof, that's a good question. I don't know. I think that the best interpretation, I think, is that they think it's easier. It's just easier to tell everybody to go get the shot. If you die of a heart attack 10 years earlier than you would have without it, that's very hard to prove, and they're never going to be blamed for that. But COVID cases, which is ridiculous to even be counting cases at this point, but it's another subject, they'll be blamed for COVID cases. So they think that they just tell everyone to get the vaccine. That's better for them. I mean, there's also just the question of profit. I mean, pharma is making a huge profit off this. And I think that's a likely explanation for part of what's going on.
Yeah, the intertwined nature. So I watched the Rogan Malone interview. Yeah. We all sort of snuck off into a dark corner and watched this.
Before, didn't it get taken down or something? Yeah.
Is it off Spotify now?
I think it's off, yeah.
That's amazing weird to me. So naturally, everybody's now going to watch it more.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I learned from hearing that interview, and I knew this, but like it's amazing how intertwined the research arm of the government and the funding of government research grants is with pharmaceutical companies. And it's not at all clear where the line is between public and private when it comes to a lot of healthcare products that come out of pharmaceutical companies, but particularly this vaccine.
Yeah.
So I think there's that the profit motive is quite interesting, because if I was a private company and I could get the government to mandate that everybody has to get the shot and then get boosted, like that's a good business model.
Yeah.
But it's empowered by the fact that the monopoly power of the state. I mean, sure, private companies want to make money, but only the government can force everybody to take this
right.
vaccine. That seems like a pretty toxic mix.
It is, yeah. And I mean, it's leading to a huge breakdown, I think, in trust between the public and these health authorities. People don't feel as though they can go to their doctor and get individualized advice. They know their doctor's just going to tell them, get the shot, get the booster, get the fourth shot, the fifth shot. Because
I mean, they're protecting themselves.
Yes.
Because if they would give you real advice, they could then be blamed for not doing the right thing or not in an abundance of caution. One of my most hated phrases. Yeah. Like just get the shot, and it's not a good decision for everybody.
No. And I mean, I know that I've heard stories from doctors have been told not to write an exemption request, medical exemption requests. So a lot of doctors are being intimidated sometimes by the state health authorities.
Yeah. So you recently wrote a piece that I recommend to everybody, and if you can, give me the citation, but the case against vaccinating children. I'm probably butchering the title, but tell me what that article was and make the case. Maybe the case is against mandating that children get vaccinated.
So I actually wrote two. One was in Tablet and one was in the Wall Street Journal. They're similar, but the Tablet one's a lot longer. Well, so the case against forcing children to be vaccinated, and I say forced. I mean, so the other side, the people in favor of mandates are always saying, and frankly, a lot of the judges, you're not being forced. We're not tying you to a bed and forcing you to get a vaccine. We're just making your job contingent upon it. Or in the cases of all of these cities that are mandating vaccination in order to go into a restaurant or a movie theater, your participation in public life, essentially. So I actually think the same arguments apply to adults. It's just sort of writ large with children because there have been far fewer studies conducted of the health effects on children, and children face such a low risk of COVID that it's clear that they're just sort of being used in order to protect adults, although it doesn't even work because, first of all, we know the vaccine doesn't stop transmission that much at this point, et cetera, but it's more like assuaging adults' irrational fear, really. So, I mean, because children face such a low risk from COVID, it's highly unethical to mandate vaccination for them. And to, New York City now, kids as young as 5 have to show proof of vaccination to go into a restaurant. It's crazy. Or a movie theater, participate in sports with their peers. So parents are put in this horrible position of having to decide between what they think is in their kids' best interest health-wise and forcing them to be essentially excommunicated from society.
What happens? Cities are mandating vaccines for kids to go back to school.
Yeah.
Give me an example of that. And what happens if you as a parent say, no, I'm not going to do that?
I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I hope that there are a lot of lawsuits, especially against public schools. It's much easier with public schools because it's essentially the government, so you can make constitutional arguments. A lot of these, arguments really haven't been tested because we've never faced anything like this, and in my cases, the government, the other side, the government is always saying things like, well, we've always required school children to get vaccines. Yeah, but, those are for diseases that pose a significant risk to children. For vaccines that have been tested for decades, this vaccine has been tested a much shorter period of time. So it's really not the same thing, not to mention the fact that typically, you get one. You don't get the MMR vaccine every 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's a really different circumstance.
We've changed the definition of vaccine to accommodate this vaccine.
Yeah.
Even though vaccines typically are a solution.
Right.
One and done, boom. It's a done thing, but obviously at this point, that's why the logic of all this is so confusing because forcing kids to get vaccinated doesn't appear at this point to provide any protection for the teachers that seem so afraid of the students, does it?
No. And again, because the vaccine isn't sterilizing and doesn't appear to be that good at stopping transmission, it's unclear if it ever was, but now with the emergence of new variants, it appears even less so. But I keep encountering this. They're always sort of conflating the arguments. So, for instance, the OSHA case, the Supreme Court heard argument last Friday. Justice Breyer said something about, well, you're saying that if we enforce the mandate, that this will have economic consequences because people will quit. But maybe all these people will quit because they don't want to work around unvaccinated others. He actually used that term. If the vaccine doesn't stop transmission, why should people be afraid? And even Rochelle Walensky, the CDC director, admitted that the vaccines don't stop transmission. So this is just a complete myth at this point. So they conflate that, and then they'll often say things like, well, the government is entitled, or your employer is entitled to force you to take a vaccine to have less work absenteeism, because if you get sick from COVID, you might be gone for a while. Well, that's just paternalistic. And at that point, if your employer should your employer be able to force you to exercise and maintain a certain BMI so that you're healthier and you're more productive? I mean, it's extremely ironic that it's the people who claim to champion the American worker who are actually advocating for a world in which the employer and the government have complete control over every aspect of their lives.
Yeah, I'm quitting my gym. I live on Capitol Hill, and I'm quitting my gym tomorrow because the mayor has decided that I have to show proof of vaccination to go to the gym, and I'm not going to do it. But I'm sort of inclined, and I'm torn because I suspect a lot of the people working at this gym totally agree with me.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they've started their emails about masks and vaccines are more and more apologetic as we go along. But I want to say to them, but I won't because I'm not an asshole. Can you show me your papers?
Yeah.
And if you're going to show me your vaccination papers, maybe I need to know other things about your health history to know whether or not I'm safe coming to your gym. And so the rabbit hole of that, but it's devastating, I think, to the district economy, because the reason I live in the district was concerts and restaurants and culture, and I can't do that stuff anymore because I don't want to keep following rules that I don't think make any sense.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I feel the exact same way, and there's something humiliating about having to show your
You quit your
vaccination
gym too, right?
I did quit my gym.
Or did you get kicked out? I think you got.
It's a long story. I got kicked out for not. Well, I quit before they kicked me out for refusing to wear a mask. Then I joined another gym. Then I quit when the masks came back. So I bought a Peloton.
Yeah, that's what. Those of us, we are, I guess, in the laptop class, so
Yeah.
we have the ability to sort of do workarounds that a lot of people, working class folks that are getting beat over the head with this stuff, don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's again the people who don't have the means that are being harmed the most by these policies.
Yeah, and I want to get into that, but you mentioned the Supreme Court, and you. We are in a situation where the oral arguments have happened, but they've made no stays or decisions at this point, and that could happen at any time.
That's true.
So we'll qualify anything you say as potentially being totally wrong because we don't know what's going to happen. But you had been basically live tweeting the proceedings, which is how I followed along with it. And it was mostly depressing hearing the arguments, even from both sides, but the fundamental lack of knowledge on sort of the left side of the court about all this stuff was pretty shocking to me.
It was. I think Sotomayor said at one point 100,000 children are in critical condition on ventilators. I think she meant like comma on ventilators, but still, I mean, that's so much, so many more. I think it's maybe a couple thousand, and that's like with COVID, not necessarily a just shocking lack of knowledge. And this insistence that the vaccine stop transmission, which is sort of the main justification for mandates. Sotomayor also appeared not to understand that the federal government isn't supposed to have police power, which is a little bit disturbing. So it's depressing that we're even in this territory, let's put it that way. It sounded to me like 6 of the 9 justices had very grave doubts about the constitutionality of the mandate. And even Breyer at some point, who was one of the 3 liberals, he voiced some concerns. I don't think he's ultimately going to vote against the mandate. But if I was going to guess, I think that they're going to strike it down. And there's some indication that there might be a decision on Thursday.
Okay, so it seemed like, I'm not a lawyer, but Randy Barnett, who you may know of, has convinced me that not all Supreme Court proceedings are based on questions of constitutionality, but it seemed like much of the argument had nothing to do with whether or not the federal government had the constitutional right to do this. They were debating, the facts and the circumstances and all that stuff. What is the balance? What is it supposed to be, and what is it in practice?
Well, so because the OSHA statute basically says that that OSHA can enforce employers to enact certain rules and regulations in the workplace when there's a grave danger and a necessity. So those words, I think there were fights about whether those words, mean COVID, and whether, what's necessary. Is it necessary if there are alternatives such as masking, or not that I think masking works. So that's why a lot of
you just got
facts,
our YouTube video banned.
I've said it a million times. So there were a lot of so I think that's how the facts came into play. Is this a grave danger? Well, it's COVID doesn't pose a grave danger to a 20-year-old. So I think that's why they got in, and it makes some sense that they got into the facts a little bit in that respect. But ultimately, I think what the ultimate issue is that OSHA is supposed to be about workplace safety. It's supposed to be about the employer having to protect the employee from workplace hazards, sort of things that, you encounter as a result of a specific job. So, like, I don't know, if you're a construction worker, having access to a helmet, or, rocks don't fall on you, stuff like that. It's not supposed to be about regulating your behavior outside the workplace or protecting you from a disease that's at this point omnipresent, really. And hopefully the court will see it that way.
Yeah. So what happens if they don't?
If they don't, it's very bad. It's very concerning, and I think, as I said earlier, I think this will allow for sort of limitless intrusion. I mean, what happened here is that these statutes were not, they were designed for something totally different, again, like workplace hazards. The federal contractor one is similar. It's actually even just more concerning because that's was based on the Procurement Act, which is about efficient and economic procurement of government contracts. So Biden used that to say, well, government contracts will be more efficiently procured if the workers are healthy. I mean, that is an absurd interpretation of that statute. So I think if the court allows these statutes to be used in this way, again, it just means the federal government will basically have limitless power over people's lives, which is certainly not intended by the Constitution, isn't good for anybody, and is also not, consistent with any form of liberalism.
It strikes me that the Supreme Court in particular, has not been the bulwark against civil liberties violations and defending constitutional rights. That's the function it's supposed to play. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even Gorsuch, who's one of my favorites, was arguing very practically that a vaccine mandate would be the prerogative of the Congress or the states. And I'm like, that doesn't give me that much assurance, particularly living in the District of Columbia. I don't know where my mayor gets these extraordinary powers that she uses to impose on us, but either you have a constitutional right or you don't. And I don't if Cuomo does it to me instead of Biden, I'm not winning.
That's true. And I agree with that. And I disagree with all mandates, but I think I think at least when it's left to the states, we know a lot of the states won't do this. So at least there'll be sort of, places to go within the United States.
An escape hatch.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if the federal government is permitted to do this, then we're sort of looking at a very different...
Well, Florida's going to get very crowded.
Exactly. Exactly. I started looking at places there.
I feel bad that I didn't get in early, but,
yeah.
But I'm sort of trapped in the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
So the court is going to decide this. I actually assume, for probably more for tribal reasons and constitutional reasons, that the court's going to go the right way, because there seems to be a majority that wouldn't be inclined to do this. But again, I'm not a lawyer, and
yeah, I'm getting a little worried that there hasn't been an administrative stay issued, because that's sort of not looking very much at the constitutionality or the merits at all. It's just like there's an imminent deadline. So yesterday was actually the day on which people would have to start to achieve the full course of vaccination by the current deadline. I think it's February 9th or something. So we were hoping to see an administrative stay by then. The fact that the court, though, has indicated that it'll have decisions on Thursday is maybe signaling to people they don't need to worry too much. We'll see. Yeah.
It's such a wicked game, though. Like, imagine if your livelihood and your family's income is at stake. And I want to pivot to that, because this is all very depressing to me. The last 2 years have been extremely depressing. The public's lack of anger against this stuff has been sort of maddening to me.
Yeah.
But I also see quite often when things get really bad, you see this pushback emerging, and people like you might be the key to this, because you were at a point 5 years ago where you voted for Bernie, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you were a Bernie bro.
Yeah.
And I've talked a lot about Bernie and how in a lot of ways he's quite similar in his rhetoric to someone like Ron Paul.
Yeah.
Even though they, philosophically they might be on polar opposites, but Bernie was always raging against the machine, right? And the machine was crony capitalism. The machine was the never-ending wars. The machine was the prison industrial complex. And of course, Ron Paul could give the same speech about those same things, but the disconnect was always that these things that are essentially a collusion between big business and big government, including like the war machine, is both, right?
Yeah.
And then Bernie ends the speech with, "That's why we need to grow the size of government." I'm like, that doesn't jive with me.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there is an opportunity to engage people, particularly people that might lose their jobs or healthcare workers that are going to get fired even though they have natural immunity. Is there a way to reignite those, what I would call constitutional principles, but more importantly, like human principles, the right to speak your mind, the right to work, the right to leave your house?
Yeah.
I mean, these are crazy radical principles, right?
Yeah. Well,
but where's the American spirit that says we need to defend that stuff?
Well, a lot of people are pretty complacent, and I think I don't mean to insult them too much, but I think are pretty happy just to play on their smartphones or whatever. But I will
that would
say,
be the laptop class,
yeah.
right? Like people that make their livings in a way that they can sort of shelter in place and expect someone else to bring their food to their door. You now have two classes of people where, it used to be white collar, but it's not really white collar anymore. It's whether or not you're in that information sector of the economy, which is huge.
Right. I mean, I do think part of what's going on is actually a number of people are actually happier this way. They get to stay at home. They don't have to get up early and commute. Their lives are easier. And I think now they can wrap it in virtue. I'm staying home and staying safe and stopping the spread and blah.
Yeah.
I mean, when did you ever get to do that?
I'm better than you.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think it's sort of it's starting to mobilize people. And I see more and more people, I would say every day. And, people from my old life reach out to me and say, like, you were right all along. Actually, finally, my dad, who didn't agree with me, called me yesterday and said, you were right all along. So...
that must have felt good.
Yeah. So I think the more extreme this gets, the more some people are waking up. But then some are just hardening in their positions as well.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard to admit that you were wrong about something so consequential, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the explanations for politicians that keep doubling down, even though there's even their own data doesn't, as cooked as it may be, their own data doesn't defend their positions anymore. But it's not a typical political instinct to stand up and say, you know what, guys, I screwed it up. I screwed up everything. I actually think that honesty might be rewarded, but they're not inclined to do that. So there's like this political equilibrium where, well, we said we were going to do this and we're going to keep locking down until COVID's gone away. As absurd as that is, they seem like Australian government seems like we're going to do this even if we have to kill all these sons of bitches to keep them safe.
Right. I mean, it's crazy to see them just keep implementing again and again these failed measures, masks, and in New York, New York's had the vaccine passport program for the longest. I sort of distinguish it by saying passport is like this city, where you have to show it to get in, and everywhere, and mandate I use to describe like employer mandates. New York has had it for quite some time. I mean, they actually started one last April through Cuomo, which was done away with over the summer when COVID eased up a bit, and then de Blasio did one just for New York City starting in the fall. I mean, it's been a complete failure. New York cases are through the roof, if that's how you're counting it. But then all of these other cities now, Chicago, Boston.
It's their measure. Yeah.
And it's like, well, we can't come up with anything else, so let's try this thing that didn't work at all anywhere.
Yeah.
It's completely absurd, and people aren't holding them accountable. It's really surprising to me that, people seem to want it to some extent. Because I think people enjoy this, like, we're the good people, they're the bad people.
And that to me, like, again, civil libertarians, left, right, libertarian, whatever, you hear the rhetoric out of someone like Macron in France.
Oh, yeah.
Or what's his name in Canada?
Trudeau, yeah.
Yeah, like it.
Oh,
I know we're not allowed to use the F word, but it feels kind of fascist to so explicitly divide the population between us and them, and declare them non-citizens, because non-citizens, I can do anything we want to those people, and I guess no sense of irony in France that guys, you're aware that this has been done before, and maybe it's not a good idea.
I know.
So we just keep going down this path. And I was trying to pivot to something optimistic, and this doesn't sound that optimistic, but I think it's an opportunity to wake people up, and I do think there's some sort of political realignment happening, and I don't think it's going to be left versus right, and this is my optimistic side. Like it could be civil libertarian versus authoritarian.
That's what I see happening
Yeah.
as well. And, if it gives people some hope, I mean, I thought government was the solution to a lot of things, and I didn't really have a problem with big government for a long time. And this has completely changed my point of view. I mean, the incompetence, the doubling down on failed measures, the lack of regard for people's well-being, civil liberties, constitutional rights. I can't imagine ever being in favor of a large federal government again. I mean, I've definitely become a federalist at the very least. I think a lot of it's important to have strong states, because at least that gives you the opportunity again to go somewhere else if you don't like it.
As a tactic, I'm very much a federalist, and I love the fact that there are good states and bad states, so ultimately we would have an opportunity to escape. But ultimately, I'm an individualist, and I can see local governments and state governments and my city government being incredibly tyrannical as well.
Yeah.
So the constitutional principle was more about, they threw the 10th Amendment in there, but it was really about the rights of the individual, which again might be the basis of that civil libertarian coalition. I forget his name, but you were on a podcast with a friend of yours who's an actor from New York.
Clifton Duncan. Yeah.
And he struck me as another guy. He described himself as red-pilled.
Yeah.
And he had sort of immersed his entire life in sort of a left culture, but was jarred out of it, not immediately, but I take it that his ability to earn a living was pretty much upended in New York City because he just couldn't perform.
Exactly, and now he's an actor and he won't get the vaccine, so he's been basically excluded from any. You can't audition or you can't be part of the Screen Actors Guild. So, his career has been more or less ruined.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And but do you meet a lot of people like this?
Oh yeah. You mean actors or just people?
Just people that are, and maybe they never gave a damn about politics, but it strikes me that there's an opportunity for people to wake up and say, wow, this whole system's corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a whole group in New York, because I lived in New York for a long time, and it's mostly people who are, used to vote Democrat, and we have a slogan of Democrats for DeSantis, actually. Who, and now just are really disillusioned with the Democratic Party, and I think none of us will ever vote Democrat again, at least unless they change, drastically.
Yeah. That said, what's his name? The minority leader in the House, who is so milquetoast that I can't remember his name.
Yeah, me neither.
It's Pete something, I think. But anyway, it doesn't matter. He put out a statement of what would happen if Republicans took the House, and it was like a big, lame yawn, nothing burger. The only problem with defeating the Democrats is then you have to deal with Republicans, and you have people like DeSantis, who I've said lots of nice things about, but he is probably making it safe for other Republicans to be more bold on this, because politically he's benefiting. I think he's become like a leader in the Republican Party, but I worry that if there is a huge turnover next year, which I actually think will happen, then you're stuck with Republicans, and will they have the guts to unwind the administrative state that has done all of this lockdown stuff? I'm not that confident. It's going to have to come from people demanding it, and that's why this new coalition matters so much, because people have to push to get politicians to do anything useful.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and I'm certainly not a Republican. I mean, I could not disagree with them more on certain topics, especially like war, and I'm very pro-choice, etc., and very socially liberal. So, but on the other hand,
you may be a closet libertarian. I don't want to out you, but
no, I call myself a libertarian now, a sort of left-leaning libertarian, I guess.
Yeah.
But so I'm not, I don't love the Republicans, but I want the Democrats I want them to get creamed so that they know that, there are plenty of us who don't think kids should be kept out of school and forced to wear N95s and get vaccinated.
Yeah, like in other countries, like I've been waiting for the anti-lockdown political backlash, and I think it's more about incumbents who lock down, and they could be right wing, left wing. I mean, the what's his name in the UK? Who's this?
Johnson?
Yeah, Boris Johnson. like he was Mr. Brexit.
Yeah.
He was like the Trump of the UK, but he's been insanely locked down. And I'd like to see a backlash against him.
Yeah.
Even though I won't particularly like the people that beat him, but the political incentive to do the right thing has to be proven at the polls.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Do you know Martin Kulldorff, one of the great Barrington,
Yeah.
the former Harvard epidemiologist? I mean, he was saying in Sweden, he's actually, as an anti-lockdowner, he's on the left, and it's the right who wants lockdowns, which actually, in a lot of ways, makes some sense to me because it's. I always thought, the right was sort of overly afraid the way they reacted to 9/11 and, willing to strip people of civil liberties for safetyism. So if I was going to predict, I actually thought it would have been the right that had done this.
Yeah. And I would have as well in a certain way, because there's also that appeal to authority.
Yeah.
Do the right thing kind of thing that runs through at least part of the conservative movement. So it might have been like, even though, a lot of this might have been anti-Trump backlash. I've seen you talk about this as well, but people forget that Trump is the guy that platformed Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
Fauci was just a bureaucrat until Trump put him on stage, and I'm sure Trump regrets that now. But Trump was talked into lockdown sort of logic as well.
That's right. I mean, Trump wasn't great on any of this, but he did sort of, he waffled, and he made a couple statements indicating he didn't take it all that seriously. And I think that prompted the left to just go completely crazy. I mean,
yeah, his original instinct on lockdowns was right. And he basically said, we can't do that.
And masks. I mean, he sort of laughed them off because,
But then the administrative state to bring this full circle. And it is, and let's end with that, because give a shout out to your organization and talk about other projects you guys are doing to rein in the administrative state. Is the entire strategy sort of legal to challenge them in the courts, or is there more to it?
Well, challenging in the courts. I mean, we're just a law organization, although we do some stuff with the media. But I mean, I would say the big mission is to end Chevron deference. That's, Chevron was this case where the Supreme Court said that if there's a statute is ambiguous, that the court should defer to the agency's interpretation, which just gives agencies an immense amount of power. So we sort of look for cases to bring in hopes that we can sort of change that approach. So we've done a number of vaccine mandate cases, but we do a lot of other related cases. We actually did some of the eviction moratorium cases, which are related. It was the CDC, which did not have the authority to do this.
Equally absurd.
Yeah, exactly. At least that one came out the right way. Saying that landlords couldn't evict tenants because of what caused spread of COVID, which is absurd. And the CDC doesn't have the authority to do that. We've had some other cases. We do some Title IX cases, so that's where, in particular, faculty are dismissed or fired because of allegations of sexual misconduct, often without any due process at all. So we had a client who was on tenure track at Cornell. A student made an allegation against him, so some sort of sexual assault allegation, and it looked like he had fired her. She was a TA. She wasn't very good at her job and seemed like she had done it out of revenge. And he wasn't even in the country when she said this happened. But he wasn't allowed any due process, so he wasn't given the right to present any sort of evidence to show that he wasn't in the country, and emails where she had said she was going to get revenge on him for firing her and stuff like that. So, we do a number of cases where people are deprived of their sort of basic due process rights, also in administrative proceedings.
And how do people follow you to get these spicy takes on what the Supreme Court does?
Well, my name is Jenin Younes, Jenin, and my last name is Younes. And my Twitter handle is @LeftyLockdowns1, which is a long story. When I made the Twitter account, I did not understand how Twitter worked, so it was Lefty Lockdown Skeptic, and then it cut off. And I didn't realize that the handle was really important. And now I'm afraid to change it because I have a lot of followers. It sounds like I'm pro-lockdown, but the opposite.
Well, all you have to do is read a few tweets and you realize. Thanks again for doing this. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was amazing. Where can I get more content just like that?
It's a great question. You're clearly a discerning consumer of the best content. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and click the bell. And if you're consuming podcasts, go to Apple, Stitcher, anywhere you get them. I'm in. Kibbe on Liberty, honest conversations with interesting people.